Thank you for coming, and welcome to this regular meeting of Township Council for May 15th, 2019. My name is Councillor Matthew Bulmer. I'm not the official mayor, but I am on the rota to fill in for Mayor Seeley in the event that the mayor is away. So I'll be chairing the meeting tonight. So the first order on my agenda is the declaration of pecuniary interest. Madam Chair, CAO, do we have any notices of pecuniary interest this evening?
Yes, we do, from Councillor Goida.
Okay, Councillor Goida.
Yes, I am declaring an interest for items on the intergovernmental affairs. Item about Mulmer aggregate and the County of Wellington aggregate motion. And I am declaring a pecuniary interest, and the general nature of the pecuniary interest is a family member owns a gravel pit.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure staff will make note of that. And just for those who are following the agenda, we did have a late arrival today, a piece of correspondence from the county, which Councillor Goida mentioned, and I think we'll be discussing later on the agenda. One other point of business regarding the agenda this evening, we will be changing the order of items 14 and 15 will be reversed, so we'll be having the confirming bylaw we passed after our closed session near the end of the meeting. Everybody okay with that? Yes. Okay. All right. So, adoption and receipt of minutes. I have minutes from council meeting May 1st, 2019, and a closed council meeting May 1st, 2019. I have a motion moved by Councillor Spula, seconded by Councillor Goida, that the minutes of the following meetings be accepted as presented. May 1st, 2019, and closed council meeting May 1st, 2019. All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I guess, do I have to call opposed if everybody's?
Nope, just
No?
carried.
Perfect, carried. Thank you very much. All right, so any business arising out of the minutes?
No.
No.
Thank you. Public meetings. So we have a couple of notices of public meetings. We had a public meeting earlier this evening for the Community Improvement Plan Amendment. That meeting was held at 6 o'clock this evening, just prior to the council meeting. And the second one is the Recreation Master Plan Phase 2, which will be Wednesday, May 22nd at the Community Center. I expect that should be well attended. Okay, communications. We have one item of communications this evening. It's response to the report we received from Nestle Waters and questions I think that came up at council. This is a responses from Nestle Waters regarding the questions raised at our May, I think it was, and Hardin's environmental comments to their annual report. Councillor Goida, do you have any questions or comments regarding this report from Nestle?
My only comment is that upon reading the response provided by Nestle in regards to Hardin's initial comments, the memo provided seems to be fairly thorough and well explained, but without having the expertise of interpreting hydrographs, at least not yet. I would have liked to have had Hardin's response to the response, but as for now, unless Hardin greatly disagrees with Nestle's consultant in the overall general statement, I'm okay with the report.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Spoulos?
Yes, I'm okay with the report, and I just want to suggest we convey our appreciation to Nestle's for providing information report voluntarily done by them, so it's good that they did it as a corporate citizen.
Good, yes, because I seem to recall there were some questions from council that day, so it was good to get a lengthy response.
Yes.
And staff made note of that, letting them know?
Yes, I will draw to the council's attention that we haven't asked Hardin to respond, though, at this time.
I'm okay with that. I can reach out to him personally if there's something that comes up.
Okay, and Councillor Roast, do you have any comments regarding the response?
Well, I kind of do. It would be nice if Nestle's seen Hardin's remarks before they make their presentation to council, and then at that time, maybe Hardin and their consultants could be here to answer questions, because we ask questions, we don't know what the consultants know, and the consultants will never agree on anything anyway. So now we'll send this back to Hardin, or if we have any questions, we'll get a hold of Hardin, and there's another expense to the township. And basically, this whole thing is out of our jurisdiction because we don't issue the permit to Nestle's. We have no control over what Nestle's do. So we're doing this at a great cost to protect our citizens in the township on something we have no control over. The MOECC should be the ones that are reviewing these reports. And I think there's got to be a better way of doing it that shows cost restraints for both parties.
So if I could ask then, that's an interesting point, Councillor Roth. I do recall that both the correspondence from Mr. Denhoad and the report from Nestle's were on the same agenda this time, but I don't know if that was the first time they saw that. Do we know if Hardin's report was sent to Nestle's prior to them appearing here that night? Do you know, Madam Chair, Madam CAO?
Yes, I can confirm this year it was, absolutely.
So Nestle's did have an opportunity to speak to, or to at least understand what Hardin Environmental's concerns were prior to attending. Okay. But I understand your point, Councillor Roth.
Well,
That's,
we went through the same thing last year with their annual report.
yes,
So we had to get
yeah,
an explanation from Hardin so we could better understand his comments on their
right.
experts, and then their experts made another appearance to council telling us that Hardin was incorrect. I just, there's got to be a better way, and like I say, this is, I don't know what the benefit of it is.
Yes,
Mayor?
Councillor Poulos.
I think the benefit of it is that we have an opportunity to have our expert review it, and if there's anything in there that raises concerns to us, we have the ammunition to send a reply to the MOE addressing asking them to address our concerns.
Okay, and is that what's happening?
Well, if I could, Councillor Roth, I'm going to ask, I guess it'd be my job then to ask if there's an interest from council to, that they have unaddressed concerns, and there's an interest to reach out to Mr. Denhoad again of Hardin Environmental, we would do so. But what I've heard this evening is that so far, that most people are satisfied that the response from Nestle's has addressed any concerns they had been raised by Mr. Denhoad. But, and maybe we could get clarification. Are you satisfied that the response from Nestle's addresses any concerns that might have been raised by Mr. Denhoad's letter?
Yeah, and if that's where it ends, that's fine.
Okay.
But if we keep going back and forth from their consultants to our consultants, it gets a little costly.
Yes, I understand it, and it could go on infinitely. So am I understand then from council that we're satisfied with the response from Nestle's? They've addressed all of the concerns that were expressed regarding the annual report? Is that a fair assumption then?
I think it's a fair assumption. I agree with Councilor Goyda. If there's anything that we want to do offline, we can.
Okay.
With our consultant.
Super. Good. Thank you, members of council. I think that was a worthwhile discussion. Okay, I think we've come up to the time for our first delegation. Let me just pop down there to our first delegation. I believe it is, who's first?
It's Andrew. Hi,
Oh.
Andrew Grenda from Watson
Right,
and
Andrew
Associates.
Grunda from Watson and Associates is going to give us an update on our development charges bylaw, which was in the process of being updated. If Mr. Grunda could come forward, please, that'd be great. Welcome.
Thank you.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. So the intent of the presentation today is to update council on the preliminary findings of the development charges background study and the process in moving forward for council to consider the adoption of a new bylaw. So with respect to development charges, what development charges are is a mechanism that council has available to them to recover the growth-related costs of capital as they pertain to the increase in demands for service that would arise from new development. And so these are charges that are paid for collectively from new development for those infrastructure requirements that are outside of their internal works that would be facilitated as local service conditions of development agreements. And that's empowered by the Development Charges Act for municipalities to be able to undertake to impose those charges. The reason why you're considering this at this point, and most municipalities in the province are that have development charges bylaws, is because under the Act as it's currently constituted, those bylaws have a 5-year life. And so every 5 years, municipalities have to review those and pass a new bylaw. And if they don't do so in the required period, that bylaw will lapse and you'll lose your ability to continue to impose those charges. In that respect, what you also are probably aware of is that the province has introduced a new bill, Bill 108, More Homes, More Choice Act, which will look to amend the Development Charges Act. The bill is currently in second reading. Most municipalities will again have to continue on going through this same process until that potentially becomes law after it goes through the provincial legislative process. But when that if that does come forward and amends the act as currently constituted, that will have some pretty significant implications for municipalities in terms of development charges. And I just wanted to highlight some of those to you as well. So firstly, the way the act is currently constructed today is that there are certain services that are ineligible, that cannot be used for DCs, and the act sets those out. And in doing so, what that does is that if services aren't specifically ineligible under the act, then if you have an increase in need for service, you can include that service in a DC bylaw. The focus of that is now changed, where what they're identifying are what services that DCs will be eligible to be used for. So going forward, DCs will only be eligible to be used for water, wastewater, storm, roads and related public works, police, fire, waste diversion, and transit. And fire and police as well. All other services would therefore be precluded from being included in a DC background study and bylaw. What the province is proposing to do in its place is to give municipalities the power to impose what's referred to as community benefits charges under the authority of the Planning Act. So obviously a fair bit needs to be determined in what form that'll take and the process that I'll have to go through. Also, another change is that waste diversion being an eligible service today, it's only eligible up to 90% of its growth-related costs. Under the current amendment, that would move to 100% DC recoverable for those growth-related costs. Also, it has a pretty significant implication for municipalities on how the charges will be imposed and collected. So currently, development charges are largely imposed at the time of building permit issuance under the Act. What the Act will, what it intends to do in its current draft is that if an application is moving through a site plan or a zoning bylaw amendment planning application, the charges will be calculated at the time that that application is submitted, but not collected until the time that the building permits are issued. So that'll have significant lags in the charges that would be imposed on the subsequent development. And then also for certain types of development, that being rental housing, not-for-profit housing, and industrial, commercial, and institutional, from that date of building permit or occupancy, they would also be allowed to spread that payment out over a 6-year period as well. So what that's going to have the product of doing is extending out the recovery of DCs and have some pretty significant cash flow implications for municipalities as well. So I just wanted to highlight that for you. But the methodology that is currently prescribed that we have to follow under the Act is what we've summarized in this illustration. And so because what we're seeking to understand is the increase in need for service as a result of development, the first step in this process is to look at what that anticipated development is. In this case, what's being identified through the official plan for the township over the 10-year period and longer. We then must measure the increase in need for eligible services and make sure that that's compliant, A, with council's expression for that increase in need, and also with your historic level of service that you've invested, and that forms a limitation. Once we've made that determination, then what we have to identify is the specific capital projects that at this point in time would be anticipated to fulfill that need. And you'll see those in the subsequent slides that we'll go through in a moment. And there's a number of deductions that have to be applied, most notably if there's a benefit to the existing community that would arise from those projects. So if we are undertaking a rehabilitation to a road, for example, the fact that that would have to be undertaken in part as part of the life cycle of that road, that is considered a benefit to existing and needs to be acknowledged as part of the calculation. Also, if there's any anticipated contributions or grant funding towards projects, those have to be accounted for, in that you're only entitled to recover your costs of service. And finally, for the soft services, other than those ones that I mentioned earlier, the Act requires that a further 10% be deducted and paid for by the general levy and cannot be included in a DC. And so once those deductions are made, that provides us with the net capital cost that underlies the schedule of charges that we'll see this evening. Then there's obviously a number of policies that administer that bylaw and its implementation over its 5-year term. And so just walking you through the initial findings. So in terms of that growth forecast, what you see identified here is the official plan projections for the township to 2039. For both residential and non-residential development. So when we look at the current population today, roughly about 7,700 persons residing in the equivalent of about 2,800 residential dwelling units, it's expected that that population would grow by about 19% over the longer-term 20-year forecast period. And that would be facilitated with the development of an additional 555 dwelling units over that period of time. In terms of employment, that being the number of industrial, commercial, and institutional jobs currently within the township today, that also would be expected to increase by about 15% over the longer term, adding about just under 700 additional employment jobs in the municipality, and that would require the development of about 750,000 square feet of floor space to be able to accommodate that employment demand. So with that anticipated development, we then have looked at the increasing need for services, recognizing that some services are ineligible. The services that we have considered, as you see identified here, include roads and related services of public works to maintain that infrastructure, costs related to maintaining your levels of service for fire, for that incremental demand going forward. Also, with respect to parks and recreation, additional development of parks and trails and the like, and also studies that help you understand those needs and also prepare this DC background study every 5 years. So the services that we've considered are the ones that you currently have in your 2014 bylaw. And so this is, in essence, continuing on with that practice for this next term. And so in the document that we sent to you, you'll see we've provided the details of the specific capital projects that are anticipated to fulfill those needs over the 10-year forecast period. And so the basis of that comes from the township's capital budget, asset management plans, prior 2014 DC background study, and that some of those needs are yet to be undertaken, as well as your Parks Recreation Master Plan as well. And so through those discussions with staff, we've identified those projects, and what this is summarizing is what share of those costs could be funded by development charges if the proposed charges were passed by council. And so just to walk through the structure of what you'll see in these tables, this is for roads and related services, and it continues over 2 pages. What you see identified are the specific capital projects over the 10-year period, the gross capital cost estimate currently identified for those projects, and then the share of that cost that would be potentially DC recoverable on the far right-hand side. Those costs are also allocated between residential and non-residential growth that we had looked at in the first step of the growth forecast to determine how those charges would be imposed. So with respect to roads and related services, those needs come from the city's capital budget, also the municipality's asset management plan for the next 10 years, and reflects those needs, identifying that about 84% of those projects will also benefit the existing community over that forecast period as those roads are improved. So 16% of those costs making their way into the calculation of the charge. In addition to those roads, what there's also identified is an additional grader packer that would be incremental to the fleet and would be fully funded by development charges. What you'll also see identified on these slides at the bottom is something referred to as a reserve fund adjustment. What that's reflective of is that you have a practice of imposing these charges. Those monies go into a DC reserve fund to be used for those specific projects when they come through your capital budget. The fact that you still have monies available in those reserve funds, they're being netted off against this incremental need going forward. So they are self-correcting in that regard. With respect to fire services, what you'll see identified in our discussions was the requirement for additional space and corresponding equipment for firefighters to facilitate the transference of servants for the west end, which is currently being provided by Cambridge, if that was to be undertaken by the municipality, and the associated increment of that could be paid for by development. In addition to that, there's also a motorized water vehicle and cargo trailer that have also been identified in the forecast. In total, that is about $1.2 million, of which about 76%, or about $761,000, is being included in the calculation of the charges for that service. With Parks and Recreation Services, again, the needs that are identified in here are largely reflective in the municipality's budget and your Parks Master Plan. Your Parks Master Plan had identified 2 phases. In the first phase, largely looking at replacements and removals and upgrades to existing parks, with phase 2 looking at new infrastructure that would support future development. You can see of those costs at a roughly $2.5 million, there's a deduction for what is referred to as a post-period benefit. What that is reflective is that the anticipated growth that was identified in the master plan is greater than the 10-year forecast period we're confined to for the purposes of this DC. So those costs are being deferred, but they can be included in future DCs when that growth is anticipated. Also, the benefit to existing that's been identified is to reflect the improvement to the level of service of the existing community. And then, as you see identified under this column of grants, subsidies, and other contributions, there's a deduction of about $680,000. What that's reflective of is the anticipated funding that you would be getting from third parties towards those projects that would help to offset some of those costs. Lastly, there's this deduction for the 10% statutory deduction that I referred to earlier, that if there are soft services, this is a required deduction, and so approximately $40,000 would have to be funded from the tax base in support of these. And so of the total costs of $2.5 million, approximately 12%, or about $300,000, is being included in the calculation of the charge. And finally, the last service that was considered was administrative studies. So again, these are studies that would inform the capital needs or the need for those services, as well as the preparation of the DC background study. The gross capital costs of those projects are about $275,000, with about 58% of those projects being included in the calculation of the charge. And so in total, when we look at those total capital needs over the various services, the capital program is approximately $15 million. You can see here with the various deductions that are being identified that approximately 21%, or about $3.2 million of those costs, would be included in the calculation of the charge. And when we focus in on that $3.2 million in DC recoverable costs, like we see fairly commonly across the province, the majority of those costs, in this case 61%, are for hard infrastructure costs of roads and related services. So it's largely that these charges are being put in place to address those harder service costs of roads. So with that anticipated capital cost and the associated demand, that then produces the schedule of charges as I referred to in the methodology earlier. The charges are differentiated between the residential and non-residential types of development, but then further disaggregated for residential into various built forms. And so what we know is that if an apartment was to be constructed, for example, that's going to have a lower occupancy than a single-family home would typically have, and that's being informed by census data. And so the charge should reflect that demand in those built forms. And so the charges, as you see, are differentiated by those different types of dwelling units, with the charge for a single and semi-detached unit being $5,916, and the charge for a bachelor and one-bedroom apartment being $2,734, to give you that perspective. Also, for non-residential, that being any form of industrial, commercial, or institutional, the calculated charge would be $1.83 per square foot of gross floor area constructed. And so to put those charges in some perspective for you, we've compared them to your current charges today. And when we focus on the charges today for a single detached unit, that charge is $5,483 as compared to the calculated charge of $5,916. So the calculated charge would see that increase by approximately $430, or an increase of about 8% over the charges you have today. For non-residential, what we see is a bit of a different picture. The charge today at $2.56 would actually decrease to $1.83, or a reduction of about 73 cents based on those calculations. And basically what that's reflective of is that as DCs are updated, the underlying density of development, meaning the amount of square footage that's required per employee, is updated based on employment surveys. And with that increase, what we're seeing is a bigger denominator to divide those costs over, which is putting a downward pressure on those charges. And so to put that in some, again, broader context, and partly the intent here is to provide some, again, some context for those charges in other communities, but also to help inform the discussion that if these are in part affecting locational decisions of development in your municipality, how do these charges compare to your current rates and those in neighboring municipalities? And so what we've done is we've included not only your charges, but what the development charges would be in your jurisdiction, recognizing that the county imposes charges and also the Board of Education imposes development charges as well. And so when we look at your current charges today, as you see indicated in the far right-hand side with the gray shaded arrow, that charge today is $12,599 for a single detached unit. Your share of that development charge today is 44%. The other remaining share of that is constituted by the county, representing about 42% of the DC, and boards of education at about 15%. And so with the calculated charges that we saw, that roughly $433 increase, that would see the overall DC increase from $12,600 to about $13,030, or an increase of about 3% to the overall cost of development for that type of unit in this municipality. What you'll also see by comparison to other municipalities is that those charges are relatively low. In part, and I think what I'll do and send back to council maybe for a bit more clarity, is your charges currently don't have water and wastewater in them. A number of these other municipalities do. And water and wastewater, like roads, represent a fairly significant amount of development charges. So I think for a more apples-to-apples comparison, I think taking water and wastewater out of the comparators and recirculating that to you may give you a bit better indication as to where your charges stand relative to those. So we will do that after this evening. Also, when we look at commercial, again, your charge today, recognizing your charges represent about 63% of the charge, the county's at about 37% of the charge. On a commercial development today, that charge would be $4.07 a square foot. With the calculated reduction of 73 cents, that would take the total charge down to $3.34 a square foot. And that would represent a decrease of about 18% in the overall DCs paid in your jurisdiction. And finally, when we look at industrial, what we'll see is because you do not differentiate your charges between industrial and other types, but some do, your relative position stays the same as it does for commercial, although there are some others that you've seen by comparison to the two bar graphs have changed. Most notably those in Waterloo region. The region has changed its practice, or is proposing to change its practice from having differentiated charges to a uniform charge, which will put upward pressure on its industrial rate. In Wellington North, they have lower charges for industrial, as does Wilmot as well. And so that's why you'll see a difference in those comparisons between the commercial and the industrial graphs. And so while that provides you with the calculated charges and how they compare, I also wanted to summarize the policies that you currently have in your bylaw today. We've maintained those same policies that you have, and through the public process, council will have the ability to modify those if you see fit in some cases. So firstly, with respect to the charges, as I mentioned earlier, the charges are imposed at building permit issuance. That is the default mechanism under the Act, and that's proposed to be maintained in the current background study. With respect to exemptions, however, what council does have the ability to do is to fully impose these charges, partially impose these charges, exempt certain types of uses from these charges. Those are all within council's discretion. The one thing to bear in mind, though, is to the extent that you do have a reduction or an exemption, that has to be funded by a non-DC source, right? So as we saw earlier, these charges are going to pay for specific capital projects. If council elects not to impose the full charge, you cannot draw the full cost from the DC Reserve Fund. So those would have to be funded from taxes to supplement those reductions, right? Just so council's aware of that. And so with respect to exemptions, there's in essence two forms. There's those that are statutorily required under the Act. So right now, you have charges that you impose on industrial development. Under the Act, if you have an existing industrial building today, they can expand up to 50% of their current floor area, and you cannot impose development charges on them. Also, you cannot impose development charges on yourselves, on the county, or on school boards if they're developing facilities in your community. And lastly, if you have existing residential buildings, for example, a single-family home, they're allowed to add 2 additional apartment units within that home, so in essence converting to a triplex, and the municipality could not impose DCs on those additional apartment units, right? So those are statutory and have to be observed by all municipalities who use this tool. The non-statutory exemptions that you do have some discretion over, again, as per your 2014 bylaw, is that you would exempt a temporary use from payment of development charges, and so that's reasonable because that's not a permanent use. That would have a longer-term service demand. Also, you exempt accessory uses from the payment of development charges. If there's a home occupation, they're also exempt from payment. And what we commonly see here, as we see in other municipalities, is that if there's a non-residential farm building, like a barn or a silo, for example, development charges are not imposed on those types of uses either. And then finally, institutional uses that wouldn't be exempt under those statutory obligations are also exempt under your bylaw. And so a couple final policies. The next major one is with respect to redevelopment credits. So what the Act is intending to do is to impose development charges where there's an increase in demand for service resulting from new development. If somebody is simply redeveloping a site and isn't adding to it, there is presumably no increase in demand and therefore no DC should be paid. So as an example, if somebody has a single-family home, it was to catch fire and have to be demolished, they would come in to replace that going through the building permit process. That would trigger the development charges bylaw. What would happen is you would calculate the charge for the single-family home that's replacing or being developed, but they would be given a credit for the single-family home that had been demolished. So no DC would be paid. If they came back and they built a 6-unit townhouse, then you would calculate the charge for the 6-unit townhouse, deduct the single-family home, and they would pay the difference because that's an expansion, right? So that's a fairly common practice. And under your bylaw today, you allow that credit to occur as long as they redevelop within 12 months. That's a fairly narrow window by comparison to other municipalities. Most municipalities would allow for a 5-year period for redevelopment. So one change that we're recommending is to still have that policy, but to allow 5 years for the redevelopment to occur, as opposed to 1 year. So again, that'll be for council's consideration later in the process. And then lastly, the charges that we've provided are denominated in 2019 values. The Act allows you to index those charges over that 5-year term of the bylaw in accordance with the StatsCan index. That's prescribed under the Act, and that occurs on January 1st of each year, and so that is being maintained. There are no transition policies in this case, particularly because charges are going down or increasing modestly. So phasing in those increases, while an option to council, may not be prudent and are not currently recommended. So in terms of next steps then from today is to receive input from council on the findings. We'll be then preparing the formal DC background study, which will be posted on your website later this week on May 17th. a notice will be placed in the paper, and there will be a public meeting that will be held on June 19th. And at that meeting, anyone in attendance can speak to the matter. The intent is for council to hear from the public on the proposed calculated charges and the policies, so that you can hear from them and decide if you want to make any further changes to the background study and bylaw before that comes forward to you for adoption. And it's anticipated that that bylaw would come forward to you on July 17th for your consideration and adoption, which will allow you to continue to impose these charges going forward. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. So I'll turn it over to council for questions. I would imagine that if this was just a normal updating of our development charges bylaw, the questions might be the same time after time, but I expect because there's an extra wrinkle this time, we may get some questions about the potential future changes, so. Councillor Goyda, do you have any questions?
Thank you. Yes, I do have some questions. Thank you very much for that presentation. You did an excellent job of explaining that very clearly. But I do have some questions. I have some questions about the proposed changes, but it's almost as though we're dealing with two different scenarios here. And so my first questions relate to the study as it is today under the current legislation. You touched on this briefly, but under the calculations that you had shown on the anticipated capital needs, the one column that showed there was the post-period benefit, and I'm trying to understand why a park would have a post-period benefit but not a road or a fire station.
That's a good question. So basically, it's that when we look at the needs for which those parks were identified, that comes from the Parks Master Plan.
Okay.
Right? When the Parks Master Plan was undertaken, what it was doing is it was assessing the needs for a population of approximately 9,900 persons in the municipality, right? So what that it says to us is that the intended needs are going to service that amount of growth in the municipality.
Okay.
Right? The fact that under the Act, we're only limited to 10 years, which would only take us to about 8,900 persons, what that would suggest is that there is some benefit that's being built into that capital that's going to be for growth beyond what we are entitled to charge for. So what this is doing is it's not saying that that needs to be tax supported. What it is saying is that that needs to be deferred.
Okay.
So that if you were to undertake this 5 years from now, and now that growth horizon was going to start to look at that period, those costs could now be brought in because it'd be paid for by that development.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. In the road section of the anticipated capital needs, the list includes most of those, I think all of those items are basically repaving existing roads. But it doesn't include converting any gravel roads to surface treated roads. If over the next 5 years, we were to do a surface treatment on a gravel road based on an increase in traffic, would that be eligible?
Yes.
It would.
Yeah, and so maybe to also explain a bit. So while the bylaw has a 5-year life, and municipalities have to update that every 5 years, there's nothing preventing municipalities from amending the bylaw in that period if something significant changes.
Okay.
So what might happen is it may be that a project like that may occur, and so some of the projects that are identified in the 10-year period may get pushed out as a result. And so if you're simply substituting, there wouldn't be a need to amend because an amendment wouldn't change the charge, right? So if I'm pushing out $100,000 for one project and bringing in $100,000 for another project, that would just come to council, acknowledge council's expression that that should be paid for by DCs for the substitution, and that would be reflected in your 5-year update. However, if you did something more significant that wasn't a substitution, then that would have an impact on the charge, and so you'd want to go through an amendment process,
Okay.
which would be similar to this, but much more narrow.
Okay. I'm sorry, I have a few questions. I'll try and get through this quick. The Development Charge Act is providing statutory exemptions for residential intensification to add up to 2 apartments without being charged an additional development charge. But what about, so if you're building a new home with like a purpose-built home with an apartment to be built in it, does the apartment portion, is there some sort of a difference between a purpose-built apartment and an intensification?
Yeah, and so, again, a good question. So, under the Act today, you're right, the exemption only applies if you're intensifying an existing unit and it's within the existing unit, right? Under your bylaw, you also exempt accessory uses, right? So presumably, in that definition, if somebody was adding a granny flat or an additional unit that was separate from the single-family home, then that would be exempt under that non-statutory exemption. But you're correct, your bylaw right now does not provide for an exemption if a new building was coming in with a purpose-built apartment, either within the unit or detached from it. One of the proposals under Bill 108 is to provide for that.
Okay.
Going forward. So again, if in anticipation of that, if that's something that council would want to see reflected in this bylaw, then you can provide for that as we move through this process. In just providing direction to us through staff, we can make sure that that's included either in the background study before it's drafted later this week, or after we move through the public process before it comes forward for adoption.
Okay. Other than what we have now, I guess this is kind of a two-part question. Based on what you just said, would you recommend if it would be the township's objective to make housing more affordable in our township? Is that something that we should consider adding into this exemption?
Yeah, in part. So even though it's being proposed in 108, it was also identified to be in an amendment prior to, but it needed to be implemented through regulation, and the regulation has yet to come forward. So it seems to me that it's likely that will be a statutory exemption going forward. In part, the intent there being that while it's provided for existing dwelling units, it provides consistency to allow the same in purpose-built units.
Okay.
Right? So if you wanted consistency of treatment and an acknowledgement that it would seem to be a statutory exemption coming forward, then adding it would probably be appropriate.
Okay. And along those same lines, are there any other non-statutory DC exemptions that you would recommend we either add or remove to our current list as sort of a best practices or to compare to what other municipalities are doing?
I wouldn't say that there's anything glaring. I mean, my first observation is that the non-statutory exemptions that you currently have are relatively modest, right? The one in here that we don't see that's fairly common in other municipalities is places of worship, but the fact that you exempt all institutional, to me, falls within that category anyway. It's a bit broader than that, and presumably what would be included in that institutional use definition would be things like for-profit daycare or private schools, for example, would also be exempt under that current exemption today. So it's a bit broader than just places of worship in that respect. And so again, it is really more a question for council, because again, you have the funding obligation where you're not using this tool to pay for it from taxes, right? But no, there's nothing in here that's specifically glaring in terms of an omission.
Okay. Okay, and so in regards to the proposed changes that are being made to the Development Charges Act, I mean, I can appreciate that they're not implemented yet, and so that you probably can't answer any questions definitively, but you've done a really excellent job summarizing them in your presentation and the letter that you sent to council. I found that to be very helpful. I'm wondering if since the time that you wrote that letter summarizing the proposed changes. If you've come to learn of any new information as it relates to the new community benefit charge, do you foresee that being essentially a transfer of those development charge to just a new fund that's called something different, or is there going to be like a financial impact on that?
Yeah, again, so we haven't learned anything new. There are a bunch of questions, however. Partially, so community benefits, which is Section 37 provisions under the Planning Act, typically are confined to big urban centers where they're seeking to require a developer to provide benefits where they're exceeding the zoning, right? So this is typically where you see bonus zoning provisions of, we're going to add so many floors, and therefore we're going to have charges imposed or recoveries for certain community benefits. Seems to me what they're doing, at least in documentation so far, is they're using that same framework, but they're expanding it so that it would also include not just those bonus zoning provisions, it would include soft services that were previously funded under DCs, and potentially would include parkland dedication. So it sounds to me firstly like they're thinking of wrapping all of these things into one envelope. The other thing that's unclear at the moment is in some municipalities, not particularly here, but more at upper tier levels where they're including things like maybe social housing or land ambulance or so forth. Those are not services that we currently see identified as being continued on in the DC realm. And so now presumably land ambulance, unless they change the act, would have to be part of this community benefits envelope, as an example, right? So again, it's based on the current drafting. So one of the questions is how broad is a community benefit and how narrow is it? Is it site specific? Is it broader municipal wide, as an example? The other thing that gives us a bit of pause, particularly for smaller municipalities outside the GTA, is that it appears that the community benefits charge would be imposed based on land value. And so while we know, especially for a community like yourself that's not far removed from the GTA, your capital costs are probably not very different than their benchmark costs would be, but your land values probably are. And the minister has the ability to prescribe a maximum rate. And so if they're using GTA, if they come up with a broader province-wide maximum rate that's premised on GTA land values, and so let's say that comes out at 2% of land value being the maximum charge, if your needs relative to your land values are more like 5%, that's a funding gap, potentially, right? So again, there's a lot of unknowns, but those are a couple of things in terms of the breadth of it and their ability to prescribe a maximum rate and how they might use that. That gives us pause, and obviously that's part of our questioning to the province for the June submission.
Okay, and this is my last question. So these changes to the Development Act, it said that any bylaw passed after May 2nd, which would include us, will be affected by these changes. And so we're now in the process of preparing our development charges bylaw based on the study, which is before us, based on current legislation. So if in the very near future this legislation changes, which appears, it looks like it's going to, the calculation is going to completely change. So we're kind of in this weird middle ground where we have to pass a bylaw before the deadline lapses without really knowing what rules we should include and what's going to apply to the new legislation. So when the change does take place, does this study that you've just done become completely irrelevant and we start over all again? Or how do we transition from where we are now to where we are likely going to be in the very near future?
So what we saw in 1998 when the new this legislation last time we went through this was that there was periods for transition, right? And so just like in 1998, where there were certain services that used to be eligible that were no longer allowed to be eligible, like administrative facilities, it allowed for the transition of those out of the DC realm, right? Here, it's going to be presumably allowing for that to come out of the DC realm and also bringing it into a community benefits, right? And so when you look at the wording now in section 9.1 of the amendment, what it speaks to is that if a municipality has a bylaw that expires, that those soft services will be allowed to continue on, to be imposed until the earlier of 3 dates. The date that council repeals that bylaw, the date you put in place a community benefits bylaw to replace it, or a prescribed date from the province, right? And so how we expect that would occur is that they would say, all municipalities have to transition to this by a point in time. So even if they said, by end of, 2019, for example, or hopefully 2020, to give municipalities time to comply, then what that will do is give municipalities the ability to continue on charging as you are, build your community benefit strategy, figure out what that bylaw would be and what those charges could be, and then allow you to transition and move those soft services out of the DC realm and have something there to continue to fund them.
Okay.
So ideally, that's the plan, and hopefully they give us lots of time to do that.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry for taking so much time.
Thank you, Councillor Goida. Councillor Spoulos.
Well, Councillor Goda asked some of the questions I was going to ask, so that's save some time there.
That's great.
Separate issue with respect to lobbying the province against certain of these changes, such as the calculation of the DC amount and payment installments over 6 years. Are you doing that on behalf of some of the clients?
Yes, we are.
And how do we get our input into you to lobby on our behalf?
Yeah, so that could take a couple of forms. Either what we're doing for our municipalities is like we have already. Actually, this weekend, we'll be preparing that response and sending that out to our clients in advance of June 1st, right? So what some of our clients are doing is using that information to draft their own letters to provide input into that process. And those that aren't, we'll continue to work on behalf of municipalities to do that as well by submitting our own comments. So what we're seeing with a lot of our clients is they're taking that information, they're drafting letters for submission. In a lot of cases, they're coming to us to look at them and proof them and provide guidance, and then those are being submitted on.
Okay, so I guess the question for the CEO, is that the plan we plan to do, is submit a letter with input from our consultant? I just don't want to miss the boat on this one. To me, it's a big issue for us, the changes that could be significant for us.
Well, if I may, through the chair, Andrew, is it proposed that there's a letter over and above what you've already provided, like that you're preparing something this weekend? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah,
As
so
a submission?
Yeah, so what will in essence be our submission, which will go into a lot more sort of technical detail about some of the concerns. And so our intent, again, is to continue to advise our clients on those for their use and consideration.
So, June 1st deadline, is that what I heard? Is the deadline for comments. So that it wouldn't be, I guess, possible in terms of having something come back on an agenda that would meet that June 1st deadline. So if council was inclined, they would need to just, I would suggest, based on, as part of this presentation and the fact that the letter was on the agenda with respect to the proposed changes that are coming forward, that council could put a motion on the floor that directs staff to simply support the submission that is made by Watson and send that in.
If I could, Madam Chair, I believe we have a special council meeting scheduled for next Wednesday, do we not?
Yes.
Do we have it on that agenda for council to endorse
If council
that?
wants to
That'd be-
indicate that that agenda is being modified, because when you call a special meeting of
Yes,
council, it's
understood.
usually for a specific purpose. So your alternatives are either to give support for us, indicating that we do support the submission that's going to be prepared by Watson, or alternatively, we can include that on the agenda if it's going to be available as of Wednesday next week, with council's direction that that be added as an item for that particular special meeting.
It's okay, maybe I'll just ask members of council to speak to, sorry, Councillor Roth, we'll get to your.
No worries.
Thank you. So if I could just, from Councillor Goida, we'll just quickly go around this one issue, and then we'll get back to the questions. Is that okay?
Oh, that's fine.
Okay, Councillor Goida, how do you feel? Would you like to proceed with the two choices you understood forward there?
I
endorse?
Will this cause a staff, will this cause trouble with staff to get that done in time if we wanted to add it to next week's special council meeting?
No, there's no trouble at all. I think fundamentally, the only difference is you're going to actually see what the submission is prior to us going through with the support. I believe that as a group, we need to rely on the expertise of Watson in this
Yeah.
particular case, and I don't see that staff will have anything further to add in terms of what is already being drafted by Watson, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I would be okay to review it before we send it at the next week's special council meeting, just to give the rest of council an opportunity to add anything that may be specific to the township directly.
Councillor Spoulis?
I guess I'm more reliant on the experts we have here. I really can't see myself adding anything more than what they have stated. So I'm ambivalent either way, but my preference would be just to rely on staff to work with the consultant and submit something.
Okay, so in other words, the pre-approve option.
Exactly, yes.
And Councillor Roth, you have a preference?
I concur with that. I think just have staff support what Watson comes up with.
Okay, so I think we have a consensus here. Madam CAO, how would you like that to proceed, as in terms of a motion?
Yes, if you don't mind just giving me a mover and seconder, we'll, just that you'll support the submission by Watson with respect to development charges, and then
Thank
we'll-
you. Do I have a motion? then?
Yes, I'd like to make the motion that staff be directed to support the document that will be presented to the province with respect to the proposed changes on the Bill 108 changes, so it would affect the current DCs.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Councillor Roth. I'll put that to a vote. All in favor?
Yes.
Aye. I'll say, I guess I have to say aye. I have to vote too, don't I? All right, so I said aye, so I guess it passed. Thank you. And we'll go back to questions then. Councillor Spoulis, any further
No,
questions?
that's fine. I think I was going to ask some of the questions that Councilor asked, and she stole my thunder.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine.
Good. It's good to see
Saves
the
my
shine.
voice.
That's right. Councillor Ross, do you have any questions regarding?
Well, coming third, I've really had my thunder stolen. But you talked about the redevelopment credits moving from 12 months to 5 years. It seems like quite a difference. Have you ever made this recommendation to the township before and it wasn't followed through on? Or is there not something in between that would be good for both parties? Or
Yeah, and again, a good question. I'm not sure that it had been recommended before. Maybe, again, just to provide some context, right? So the intent of the act is that we're seeking to impose charges where there's new demands for service, right? And so in some municipalities, very few, 5 years is the norm, firstly, right? In some municipalities, they would provide longer periods of time with the assumption being that if you had a level of service at some point in time, if you've demolished it, the municipality will continue to reserve that capacity until you subsequently redevelop, right? The reason why 5 years is more commonly used is because at least every 5 years, you're going to undertake a DC background study. And so if that site has been vacant for 5 years, you would be considering it as such and considering service and taking whatever service they had and redistributing it at that point, right? And so that's why 5 years is commonly used. There are some still that use 3, but again, the majority would be 5.
thank you. And as far as the changes, they call it a community benefits program. I can't see too many benefits for this community in them with the staff time that's going to take to legislate some of this stuff and track it. And so hopefully what you're putting together for argument against some of these things is done well. So you have my support.
Thank you. We'll do our best.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roth. Thank you. I have a couple of questions. One of them, Councillor Goyder raised an interesting question around the paving of gravel roads. And I just want to clarify my understanding of your answer there too, but it's important, I guess, if we have the idea that we might want to pave a gravel road and wanted to use development charges for it, we'd have to make sure that the paving of a gravel road was identified in a plan, and we were collecting development charges for that purpose. Is that correct? We couldn't use them if we hadn't collected them for that purpose.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, again, your development charges are being collected based on, firstly, what we think this increase in need for service is going to be. And they are related but different, right? So that's the intent. The capital projects are what we expect at this point in time that will fulfill that, right? But what we know is that things change. And so in most cases, what we're hoping is that that will be the plan, at least, following that for the next 5 years. But it doesn't necessarily preclude you from changing that plan. Right?
Understood, but if we hadn't collected development charges to pave a gravel road, we couldn't use development charges to pay for paving a gravel road.
No. So again, so you're collecting charges
Right.
for the increase in need for road services,
Yeah.
right? And that can take a variety of forms, right? It could be, in this case, resurfacing or reconstruction. It could be paving a gravel road. It could be widening a road, right? So that's the need. So the need is road services. The capital projects is how you think you're going to fulfill that need.
Okay, so
And
we
that
could
may
use them.
change. Yes.
Okay, so that's good. I was concerned when I heard that, we don't have one identified yet, and we're not saving specifically for one under development charges, so thank you. So what else? Talked about the community benefit plan or program or charge, and one of the pieces you touched on that I'd heard and read about that wasn't identified in the correspondence we have in our council package was the elimination of the parkland dedication and rolling that potentially into the community benefit charge. I guess, I don't know if this is going to be in your bailiwick or not, but when I hear this change from going from development charges, which are prescribed charges, and we typically don't have any issues with collecting them, or with the parkland dedication, and I kudos to council and staff who worked very hard over the last couple of years to get our parkland dedication where it should be on severances. Changing the way it is now as a prescribed thing to a sort of a local bylaw-based charge, does it open those up then to appeal or question as opposed to this is just it's statutory? Does it change our ability to be certain that's what we're going to get?
Again, I think there's a bunch of unknowns around that community benefits sort of mechanism and how that will function. One of the things that, just to clarify the point earlier, so where that reference to the parkland dedication comes from is that, so they released the bill on May 2nd. The document that the bill was based on is where we see the acknowledgement in there that it could include parkland dedication as well, right? So in the housing action plan document itself, that sort of leads to that section in Bill 108. It speaks to this, community benefits charges. It speaks to Section 37, soft services of DCs, and potentially parkland dedication, right? So again, there's a bit of unknown there, but that's where that comes from in that respect.
Right.
And then in terms of how that will, the process that will take, so one of the things that's currently in Bill 108 at the moment with respect to community benefits is that there seems to be a mechanism around disagreements of the value of land, right? And how that would occur. At this point, I'm not as familiar as to, are we going to have a prescribed methodology as to how community benefits are calculated, like we do with a DC, for example? So unfortunately, I don't have a definitive answer in that regard. Hopefully, we'll start to see more. And unfortunately, what we see a bit of in this legislation, like we've seen in recent legislation, is a lot of it potentially coming through regulation, right? So it's creating a framework where a lot of the details will come through the regulation that we just don't know yet.
So keep tuned, or stay tuned, as they say. All right, well, thank you very much. Any other questions from council before we? No? Okay. Well, thank you so much for your presentation, and I appreciate your clarity on this issue. I think it's helped. It certainly helped me, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, I've got let's see, I think I can just get back to my agenda here. Okay. I have a motion moved by Councillor Sapoulis and seconded by Councillor Goida to accept the presentation from Watson and Associates regarding our development charges bylaw update. Is that correct? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, aye. Perfect, good, thank you. All right, our next delegation is Dr. Tivy from the chair, she's the chair of our Heritage Committee, and she'll be providing council an update on the activities of the Heritage Committee. Please come on up, make yourself at home. I must admit, I think I'm more comfortable having you in this chair. That's what I'm more used to seeing as a member of your committee.
Thank you. All right, can you turn that so that the counselors can see it?
We can see.
Can you?
We have it here.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I want to begin by thanking the Township Council for their continued support of the Township Heritage Committee. And we have 4/5 of the committee here tonight. Matthew Bomer, John Arnold, and John Levac, who are in the gallery. Tonight, I want to discuss our efforts to document heritage resources in the township. And these resources can be buildings, landscapes, or archaeological sites. They may be adapted for reuse, but otherwise they are non-renewable. And once they are gone forever. Our heritage resources hold great potential as elements to develop economic opportunity and build community, as indicated in our new branding and logo on the screen. And in our strategic plan, which says that we will protect our resources while respectfully building upon our heritage as a safe, fun, and prosperous rural community. It's my impression as I go forward with this that councillors and the mayor were quite concerned that we maintain a sense of community as a rural community as we go forward. Now, the landscape of Puslinch Township is extremely rich with the physical memory of the Highland Scots, Germans, English, and Irish settlers who first arrived here almost 200 years ago. Over the next century, they left their mark on our township in their houses, barns, schools, churches, industries, stores, and of course, place names, such as Aberfoyle. The importance of this built heritage is reflected in this redesign of the Puslinch Township logo. And historic architecture was consistently cited regarding community identification and sense of place in the township's rebranding strategy. So, very briefly, what is the role of the Municipal Heritage Committee? Most municipalities in the province have municipal heritage committees to advise on the designation of properties and to maintain a municipal register of cultural heritage properties, neither of which we have done or have at present. We are responsible to council for identifying, assessing, and documenting heritage resources. And under council's direction, our work is guided by the regulations of the Ontario Heritage Act and the heritage policies of the County of Wellington. These guidelines are outlined in full in the written report accompanying this presentation. We do have an unofficial list of heritage properties that we created and that is consulted by planning to advise us of zoning changes or building permits that may affect heritage properties on our list, so we can be informed. All right. In addition to working on a municipal register, we produce a monthly column for the Puslinch Pioneer. We participate in various heritage events and are planning a doors open event for Puslinch in 2020. We provide individual advice to homeowners on building conservation practices, and we advise others who are interested in the history of particular buildings in the township. And thanks to council, we have been able to attend Ontario Heritage Conferences, where the role of municipal heritage committees in the conservation of rural and what is now called post-rural communities is often highlighted. Our new logo says that Puslinch is a township of heritage. Formal documentation of the heritage resources by the township began over 30 years ago with the formation of the local Architectural Conservation Advisory Committee, or LACAC as it was known then. A catalog of heritage resources was prepared and updated annually to the effect that we now have a very large inventory of built resources, over 160, and the one pictured there is the Kalfas House, and beside it is an image of our committee at a site visit last year, I believe. We also have an inventory of cultural heritage landscapes, such as Starkey's Hill, as well as archaeological sites. These remain unmarked, but they are historically significant. In fact, one is particularly historically significant as the largest ever known Adirondack village in the history of that culture, and it was situated in Morriston in 1450 AD. It was spread over 13 acres and had 4,000 residents, which seems to me to have been the largest community in the history of the township. It was excavated in 1985, partially excavated in 1985. All right. Now, LACAC's awarded plaques for good stewardship of heritage properties that were 100 years old. Those were their criteria. And changes to the Ontario Heritage Act in 2005 broadened this criteria to assess significance beyond architectural stewardship. And so now both historical significance and community context are included as primary criteria. At the same time, LACACs were renamed Municipal Heritage Advisory Committees to reflect this expanded view of what constitutes heritage resources and heritage significance. And here in this slide, we can see the difference in how significance can be assessed. Both of these buildings have heritage significance. One is plaqued for good stewardship, and that's a schoolhouse. And the other is a log cabin covered with siding. It's not plaqued. It looks fairly insignificant, but it is the home of the founder of Fraserville, later renamed Crieff, and it's an early building. The 1906 map of Puslinch Township, which you can see over there as well, shows structures on each lot. Any of these buildings still standing may have the potential to be identified as a heritage resource. Using a GIS overlay of structures currently being assessed for inclusion in the municipal register, we can see how many of these resources, maybe you can't see it there, but you'll see it in your package, are still present in our township. Listing is an interim measure that provides some protection against demolition insofar as it extends the period by which a demolition permit can be issued. That's the extent of its protection. It involves the inclusion of non-designated properties. So the kinds of properties I've been talking about, the list usually is put before council for resolution, and in some cases, property owners are notified in some municipalities, and in other municipalities have a policy of simply going ahead and creating a register. It is always a work in progress, and properties can be added or subtracted as needs be to the register. The purpose of the register is more than just an inventory. It's very important for planning, and its use not only promotes a sense of community, but it has implications for all those other items that are bulleted there. And I'll expand on those a little bit. I participated in the National Trust Roundtable on Conserving Rural Heritage and Rural Sustainability, and these were the takeaways that seemed to have particular relevance to us. Sense of place, which I think is what the branding operation was trying to identify, is central to rural sustainability. Heritage resources are the foundation to a sense of place. Design guidelines are necessary to physically maintain a sense of place. Local initiatives support a sense of place, a rural sense of place, and economic development through cultural tourism is vital to sustaining a sense of place. So let's look at the last 3 points. The Township of Puslinch does have a design guideline study that says it will reinforce rural character of township and villages through enhancing streetscapes, promoting quality development and respect established character by conserving heritage assets and integrating natural resources. Citizen involvement and sense of place. I'm always impressed by the extent to which our private property owners invest in the heritage resources in our township through the rehabilitation and conservation of structures and landscapes. These are only 2 examples of over 100 in the township. And just very briefly, the building on the top left was the first building built by, or at least the first building we have built by John Kalfas in the 1840s, and he is considered the founder of Morriston. And this is a young couple who have poured their heart and soul into restoring this building. On the bottom left and right, there's a before and after picture of a magnificent stone barn just outside of Arkle, one that is recognized as being rare in the province and is certainly identified in books about barns. Many property owners have asked if grants or tax deferments are available to assist them in the restoration of these structures, and I have not been able to provide them with any positive advice around that. The federal government no longer provides grants, nor does the province, but I have referred them to our CIP initiative. All right. A sense of place and opportunity. I think if we can encourage adaptive reuse, it's an excellent way to conserve heritage resources. And we did just see some examples before. Often these resources, such as the bike shed and the chiropractor's office and the Danish place, are used by commercial concerns in a very productive way. And they also, I think, are very important in each of those communities for identifying a sense of place. So I would say that adaptive reuse manages sustainability, and creates opportunity through programs such as the Community Improvement Plan. Finally, economic development through cultural tourism is really vital to sustaining a rural sense of place. And I've talked to a few people who use the township in a recreational fashion, in particular cyclists. Speed River Cycle has 28 routes that go through Puslinch Township, and I've been told that people don't stop because there's nowhere really convenient for cyclists to stop. They go to Dars and Moffat, and that's fearful. And they go over to Campbellville. They will risk Dars. So I think that's just a comment that there are lots of opportunities here. The biggest one I see right away is the village of Marston, and with the optimism of a bypass and a no truck through route, I think that this village has every potential to be a tourist destination village. We really don't have one in this area. I can think of Elora, I can think of St. Jacobs, not that I'm wondering if we should put Legoland in here, but it's simply that the resources are still there and they are intact. They are well looked after, and they're, as far as I'm concerned, just waiting to be developed for heritage tourism. And there are all sorts of other opportunities, including interpretive signage. But finally, what I want to say is that we are working on this register as a preliminary and significant inventory in order to go forward with these other ideas and toward really helping this community gain a very strong sense of place and fulfill its strategic plans. That's it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Presentation. I'm going to turn it over to council see if they have any questions of reports. So, Councillor Goyda, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
For speaking to us today about the activities of the Heritage Committee. I agree with what you say about the sense of place for sure, and seeing buildings that have historical significance being repurposed and restored. I think it does give our township a lot of character, and I believe a sense of community and pride amongst our residents. So it's also very encouraging to see and to know that there are so many private landowners that have sort of taken the interest and initiative to restore many of these buildings on their own, using their own money to do so. I really only have one question, and it revolves around the official register that the committee is working on completing. I guess what I am wondering is, once that register is implemented, what would the process be in terms of the Heritage Committee if a building permit or a demolition permit was submitted that where one of those properties is identified? Would there be a role, or is it just sort of just to flag the attention?
In my experience, what happens is the committee is put in a position of determining whether or not there's any kind of mediative option, and sometimes there is. Sometimes homeowners, property owners, will agree to keep one of the facades or whatever in their redevelopment. But the process is really simply that we have time to document the structure, time for council to respond to any recommendation we may have regarding the issuing of a demolition permit. There's no restrictions otherwise on the property owner. It's simply a larger time envelope.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Saboulis?
No, I don't have any questions. I just want to commend you on the good work you're doing and keeping the soul of the township together, so to speak, by Well, by actually identifying all these, I think, important landmarks that are worthy of preserving. I really thank you and the committee for all the work you do.
Well, I often say this to the point where I wonder if people think I'm being trite, but when I moved to Puslinch and realized how many heritage resources were intact, I was astounded, because I'd moved from Guelph, which had essentially been gutted in the 1960s, and where there just wasn't I would say there wasn't the quality of resources that I see here, that are almost silent. I mean, they're there, and they're just, yeah.
No, your committee's done a good work being a spokesman, identifying all these and bringing it to our attention. I certainly wouldn't been aware of this without the committee.
Oh, good. Yeah.
That's all, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Roth?
Thank you very much. Very good report. Nice to have an annual report.
Yes.
It's the first one that I know of, so I thank you again for that. When do you expect to have the registry done?
Well, our expectations, I would like to see it done. Karen, do we have a summer student?
Not yet. We're in the process of looking for a summer student, and as the chair has indicated, and as council approved through the budget process, the first task will be to verify, I'm going to say, the information that's contained on the register, ensure that we have the appropriate documentation on file. Also part of that process will be ensure that we're able to track those particular properties through the GeoCortex system that we utilize through the County of Wellington, and ensure that we have all that information too as well in our Keystone system. So I would be hopeful that that task can be completed through the summer, and through work also with the committee members, and bring that back this year. That would be, I'm sure, the goal of the committee as well.
We have, Councillor Roth, we've done quite a lot of work on this, and part of it that is very organic is going back through these early properties that were identified and seeing if they're still intact, seeing if they meet the more recent developed criteria under the Ontario Heritage Act as having heritage significance. It's really important for us to adhere to that criteria so that the decisions we make can be rationalized by other people in the future, so that we have a solid base for the listings that we create. So yes, I would hope later in the year. I must confess, sometimes it's a bit like herding cats. The information may be incorrect. In the initial inventories, there was personal information in the files that we'll have to remove, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm.
So it's a little complicated.
It's multifaceted.
And you say in here, notification of property owners is recommended. I would have thought that would have been mandatory.
You would have thought that. It's not. So I've had debates with this. The mayor of Markham just says, they're on there. That's we're decide. This is our decision to make, and doesn't seem to think that homeowners need to be notified. The city of Guelph, on the other hand, not only notified every homeowners, but provided who were on the list, but provided a method by which they could request to be removed from the list.
Yeah, and I'm a great believer in protecting our heritage, but at the same time, it's pretty hard for someone that doesn't have any skin in the game to say your house is, going to be designated or listed if they don't want it to be.
I think it's really important in how we communicate the purpose of the register, and frankly, the very few limitations that it puts on property owner which is just 60 days instead of 10 for a demolition permit.
A lot of people it has to be explained to them. right?
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's great to bring the committee out of the dark and into the light. I must admit, when I first, I didn't appreciate how much work you guys were doing as a committee to get the list straightened out. Having gone through various iterations and going from written forms, different softwares in the past, being transposed, and the number of errors that had occurred in terms of where a particular building might actually be. And of course, the change from lot and concession addressing to municipal numbering also introduced some variances and challenges where errors occurred. And it was I think the entire committee would agree that we didn't see the potential in what you were doing until we had a staff member with a special skill. That was when Kelly Patzer was here with her GIS knowledge and started to be able to unravel this knot. And then the committee started to see the potential in getting this thing sorted out. I really commend you for having the tenacity to work through it that far. I just want to touch on a couple of things you mentioned there. You talked about Aberfoyle and a sense of place. As you probably know, the original name for Aberfoyle was Schattsville, and the first storekeeper was one of Duncan McFarlane's ancestors, who gave it the name Aberfoyle, which is why, of course, when the Aberfoyle Farmers Market opened, they invited Duncan McFarlane, I should say, to come and cut the ribbon, because it was the first market, another market with the name Aberfoyle on it. So just to embed that sense of place in that new community-led operation, I thought it tied back through history. Also, one of the things when I joined the committee, I think what surprised me, which I think would surprise a lot of people if they didn't ever go to these committees, is that being on the list isn't automatic. It isn't just because something's old. I'm constantly surprised at the discussions that take place as to the relative merits as whether something should be on the list or not. I know for myself, I thought, well, it's old enough, it's going to be there, but that's not always the case. There are discussions that take place when the committee does its site visits. There are some discussions around the relative merits of the property and what features should be identified and what not. So it's not simply a gathering up of everything old, but there is some assessment of the representative value of the structure, and I certainly appreciate that. And I believe I'm understanding that correctly. Am I not? That there is some critique or understanding of things before it gets put on this list.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
We're working, I think we're juggling several things in the air at once. And one is that we will now use the regulation 0906, which lays out very specifically criteria that you can check.
Right.
And what this means is that buildings such as the stone farmhouse across the road with the barn that's so interestingly shaped is very early to Puslinch. It's one of the few pre-1851 stone buildings in the township. It's not in great shape. It's had alterations, and previously a LACAC would not have recognized it. But even if it doesn't survive the future, we are documenting it. And it's important for us to document that which is removed as it is, that which is not. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I'm also interested, you mentioned the bike shed and the chiropractor, and it's interesting, the latest reincarnation, the Frontier Landscaping reincarnation of the blacksmith shop in Arkle. That's
Yes.
it was interesting to see as well.
It was. I was glad that they exposed the stone, but I have to say that the previous owners had consulted us on how to remove the white paint and how to parge appropriately. And you need to parge limestone with a lime mortar. I don't think that happened, but I'm just very grateful that it wasn't demolished.
It's repurposed, as you said.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'm glad you brought so many of your committee members with you this evening.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate your comments.
And I'm looking forward to continuing to serve on that committee.
Thank you. So are we.
Thank you. So I have a motion before me from Councillor Sepoulis and seconded by Councillor Goida that the presentation, that the council receives a presentation by Dr. Tivy of the Heritage Committee regarding their annual update. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Thank you. Okay, I guess we can go back to our regular agenda. We were up to, just give me a second to get there on my agenda. Okay, we're going to intergovernmental affairs. I think that was item 6 on the agenda. 6.2 was. So, item number 1. A, we have Conservation Halton regarding the cuts to their flood control budgets. They feel it represents 1.5%, potential 1.5% increase on the levy. Any questions or comments regarding that?
No.
No.
Okay, B, more homes, more choice from the Ontario government. Any comments or questions regarding that from the minister, Councillor Goida?
No.
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 I guess the only concern I had was it didn't specifically identify the changes to the Planning Act regarding the loss of the parkland dedication. I think that was a pretty important piece to us, and not knowing how that's going to change or how we're going to be able to work with that in the future, I think and because we're counting on it for several projects, so. But is it possible, Madam Chair, or Madam CAO, will the Planning Department be preparing a comment regarding some of these changes, since these are changes in the Planning Act?
Yes, the county planner is actually working on a report and will be reporting to the county and then subsequently come to our council to give an update in
Okay.
terms of the magnitude of the changes.
Okay, super. Thank you. Okay. Item C, we have a motion from the Township of Mulmer, and I believe we had a notice of conflict of interest from Councillor Goida on this topic. So
Correct.
council members will just exclude Councillor Goida from this conversation. We have correspondence from the Township of Mulmer regarding changes to the Aggregate Act.
Yes, I'd like to speak to that. I'd like to also draw the attention that we did receive correspondence from the County of Wellington, which was addressed to the aggregate reform, I guess called a committee. And basically, that was a well-written letter, and I was looking for somehow for us, the township, to provide comments as well to the aggregate reform. So I'm proposing a motion as follows, that Council for the Township of Whistler hereby supports the comments outlined in correspondence from the County of Wellington dated April 26, 2019 regarding reform of Ontario's aggregate industry, and the Council requests staff to advise the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Ministry of Finance, and MPP Ted Arnold of its support of the comments outlined in the County of Wellington's correspondence. I think the County of Wellington's done a bang-up job in terms of outlining all the issues and spelling out what I think we would want as well. So I'd like to put that forward as a motion.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Spoulos. Councillor Roth, do you have any comments regarding the?
Well, I would certainly second that motion, and I think it addresses most things that we are concerned about in this township. So I would certainly endorse the county's recommendation.
Yes, I would concur. I must admit, I did go online, although we weren't invited to participate directly. I did go online and complete the online survey. It wasn't as satisfactory as I had hoped. But although my issues with the Ag Resources Act and the issues we see here, may not have been completely captured by that letter from the county. I think for that issue, I think it's best we get behind it as well. I know we have challenges here regarding the applicability of site plans and how relevant the site plans were shown at time of zoning have in terms of planning process. But I don't know if that could be captured in a simple letter. So I'd certainly support it. So I have a motion and a seconder, so I guess I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Perfect. Good. So we'll move on that. Thank you very much, Councillor Spoulos, and I trust that the letter from the county will be included in added to as an addendum to the information on the
Yes.
council package?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so E, we have an invitation from the city of Stratford to attend I think it's called Stratford Festival invitation. I can't remember what they call this day. It's a municipal day or
Civic night.
civic day at the Stratford Festival. That's it. Any questions on that? No? And then we have Township of McKellar, concerns about the cuts to the library services. Okay, we have something from the Town of Mono regarding OMPF funding. Any questions or comments on that?
Nope.
I have a question on that. Perhaps it's for our Director of Finance. If I think back to the origins of this type of funding, there was a time when the farm tax credit, anybody that was getting the farm tax credit, conservation land tax credit, or the managed forest land tax credit, paid in full to the municipality and received those tax credits from the province, since they were to benefit the broader public. And this funding was started to be equal to that, to make it apparently revenue neutral when it started. But I'm wondering, has it been, the talks in here about it's been dropping since 2012. Do we know what percentage of those tax credits this funding is currently covering? If you understand my question.
I do understand your question, and I have heard of this history in the past through the county treasurer's meetings, but I don't have those exact numbers right now.
Okay, because this is my concern about losing this funding, and I would like to support this resolution because it's, ever since that change, those, especially the farmland tax, the farmland credit, in some people's minds makes farmland look like a liability, where it was never intended to be a liability. It was, and but when people see that they're only paying 25% of the taxes, it's not understood that they're supposed to get that, supposed to be made up for by an equivalent grant from the province, because otherwise, food production is only being subsidized by rural residents. The urban populations where most of the food goes aren't contributing to the production of inexpensive food. So, I would like to suggest that I'd like to either come up with an equivalent one for ourselves or endorse this one, if council's supportive of this motion. At least I'd hate to lose this funding. That's what I understand this motion that we got from Mono was about. Any comments? Councillor Goyda?
I'm not sure I entirely understand what you're saying about the historical intent. I do agree that this is important funding and that if we lose it, it's going to have significant impact. And so I would be okay to endorse this this motion that's been put forward by the town of Mono. I just don't know if you're looking to word it in such a way.
Oh, no, just trying to endorse what they're
Yeah.
asking for, and I'm just giving some context as to why I see
Yeah.
it so valuable.
Yeah, I would support that.
Councillor Spoulos?
Yes, I have a question for the CAO. Did our mayor not pen a letter with respect to impact of cuts by the various funds we received? And I thought that would have been included as well. The Ontario Municipal Front was included in that letter?
Yes, so I do agree that the mayor did provide a letter
Okay, so-
as it relates to the OMPF fund.
Okay, so we've done that already, so I really don't see the need for us to.
Good point.
May I speak, Mr.
Yes.
I think, I remember the finance person that the county, Kennedy Hardin's name, can't think of his title right now. But anyway, he talked about this very issue about how it used to be and how it is now, and how it was supposed to be revenue neutral.
Yeah.
And how now the rural communities are supporting the cities as far as farms and the tax the way they are now. And I think it would be maybe a good idea if we as a council asked the county to pen a letter explaining those details
Yes.
to the right people and giving them a bit of history, because a lot of them may not even know how the OMPF came about.
Yes.
So that might hit a nerve that would maybe make them realize how important it is. Because it's really not fair that the rural communities are supporting the cities with farm taxes.
Thank you for that, Councillor Roth. I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of finding a clear way through this. Mind if I'm just going to ask you, Councillor Goida, is that?
Yes, I would be happy with that, and I think now that you've said that, Councillor Rose, that does ring a bell a little bit with that discussion that took place, and yeah, I would support that too.
Yeah, I would support that. It's certainly not captured in this letter from,
Yes, you're right.
from that, so I would support that approach. Would you like us to put the motion together?
Perhaps some direction, maybe I'll ask Madam CAO, would you like some direction from council for staff to do that, or?
Yes, and Mary will liaise with the county treasurer in that regard. That's okay with council?
Do you need a motion to that effect, or just, we're fine?
You want a motion to that? Yeah, there should be one.
Okay, maybe I could ask Councillor Roth to put that excellent suggestion in the form of a motion?
Right now?
Well, we've got the motion. We know the direction.
Okay. So now what do you want me to do?
Move it?
Oh, certainly.
All right, Councillor Roth has moved
I'm
that
confused.
that his good idea be
after
acted
my
upon. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Roth's good idea?
Sure. I would second it.
Councillor Sepoulis, thank you very much. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye, thank you very much. Good work. Okay. H, Region of Peel. Overview of health system transformation. Any comments on that?
No?
Nope.
Okay, we have a letter from the OPP regarding, so just a general update. Any comments or questions on that?
No.
And J, on libraries again, from Essa Township. Okay, nothing?
No.
Okay, so I believe I have a motion moved by Councillor Sepoulis, seconded by Councillor Goida.
If I may. Mr.
Yes?
Chair,
You may.
I'm going to suggest that Councillor Rose second that motion because it includes receipt of all the correspondence within intergovernmental affairs.
All right,
just
we
to
can
limit
amend that.
That's
Yeah.
fair, yep.
Yes, of course, because Councillor Goida
Yep.
declared. So we'll amend that. It's moved by Councillor Sepoulis, seconded by Councillor Roth, that the intergovernmental affairs items on the agenda be received for information, and that, I guess, council, staff proceed as directed?
Oh, you already taken the one, so yes,
Or
we're
did-
covered.
Okay,
Yep.
we're covered, all right. Just be received then?
Yes.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're getting along here, all right. Okay, we're through the delegations. I'm getting there. Okay. Item number 8. We have reports. Pleasanton Fire and Rescue, I don't believe we have any on the agenda. We have then Finance Department, we have 2 reports. We have, I'm going to have to read this slowly. There's a number here.
It's a big one.
FIN 2019-022 space dash. Oh, it's the asset management plan. Oh, this is we are now, Council, we've received this several times before for review. I believe staff has updated it recently. Perhaps if I could just ask, since this is for final approval and we received a delegation on this at our last meeting or the meeting before, perhaps I could ask staff, would it be the Director of Finance, just to give us a few lines on any modest changes that have happened since the last time we saw this before we approve it? Would that be appropriate?
Yes, so there weren't any specific financial implication changes, just some minor items, just based on my review of the full document to the asset registry and the Excel spreadsheets provided by the consultant. And so this is the final document that addresses all of the items and just making sure everything aligns.
Okay, so I'll just read out the motion, then we can have any discussion if council has any comments they'd like to make. Thank you. Okay, so I have a motion moved by Councillor Sepoulis, seconded by Councillor Goida. This is a long one. That council adopt in principle the asset management plan prepared by Urban Environmental Management Incorporated and attached as, attached to Schedule A to report, here's the number again, FIN 2019-022, and that asset management plan be utilized to help the township identify and prioritizing its long-term infrastructure needs, and that the asset management plan be used as a tool for the asset. I'm going to have to ask the CEO. This is a long one.
It is a long one. I can help out
I'm
a
going to
bit
get
here.
tongue-tied here in a second.
Okay, and that the asset management plan be used as a tool for the township's capital program, and that the service levels outlined in Section 5 of the asset management plan be approved, and that the asset management policy in Section 20.4 of the asset management plan be adopted, and that's all.
Perfect. I got to the end too, so. So I have a mover and a seconder for this. Now it's open for discussion. Any comments or questions before I call the vote? Councillor Goida?
No.
Councillor Poulos?
I just want to thank the staff for putting through this report and dealing with some challenges along the way with some of the consultants who they engaged. And this will definitely help us in the future during our budget deliberations. I look forward to the next step in the implementation of this.
Excellent. Councillor Ross?
I agree, and I'm ready for the vote.
Yes, thank you. And I must admit, I think having this tool will help depoliticize some of the discussions as well as regarding the maintenance of our assets, and I think that's always a good thing. So, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, item B is regarding the final tax levy and rates. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Sepoulis and seconded by Councillor Goida. That report, FIN F2019-023, that's correct?
It is.
Regarding the 2019 final tax levy and rates be received, and that the final property tax rates as shown in Schedule C2 report in 2019 as stated above, and the final property tax due dates be established as Friday, August 30th, and 2019, and Thursday, October 31st,
Halloween.
2019. Halloween.
Yeah.
Trick or treat, folks. Mark it on your calendar. And the council enact a bylaw for the 2019 taxation period, year 3 period. Oh, what? Administration department. Oh, that's the next
That's the next one.
year. Okay, perfect, for the year. Everybody in favor?
Yep.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Did you understand what I said?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, item 3, Administration Department. No reports. Planning and Building, I think we have an update from the Building Department. We have a motion from Councillor Sepoulis, seconded by Councillor Goida. The report BLDG 2019-005. With respect to the Building Department monthly report, be received for information. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, aye. We're done that one. Well, that was the monthly update, 2019, okay. Roads and Parks Department, none. Recreation Department, none. Mayor's updates, he's not here. Page, notice of motion, none that we've got. Committee minutes, none. Thank you, staff, for making this light for me. Bylaws, okay. Motion moved by,
Matthew, we're going to do that after closed session.
oh, after closed session? Okay,
Yeah.
so we're just going to move straight into closed session then?
Well, you have your municipal
Oh,
announcement.
municipal announcements, I'll deal with those quickly, so. Councillor Goyda, do you have anything under municipal announcements?
No.
No? Councillor Sepoulis?
I don't have any, but I think Councilor Goyda helped pick up garbage during the ditch day.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
So I think it's commendable she was driving around, helping out.
Yes, she was. She's a big help. I was going to mention that as well.
Okay.
And Councillor Rose, do you have anything?
I have nothing.
Well, I don't have it here. But I would like to thank township staff and members of council for all of their participation in the township cleanup that took place on the first Saturday in May, Saturday, May 4th. This year, again, it's really blossoming into a full community event. And I'd like to acknowledge the township staff that took place this year. So I'm sorry I haven't memorized all the names, but we had 6 firemen. Sean Whaling from the fire department brought out 6 additional firefighters to ride in the trucks, which was a great turnout from that department. And of course, the roads department supplied 2 township trucks, and 2 township road staff came along in those trucks to help pick up the garbage on the side of the road that day. And with John Kerr and Cassandra,
Cassandra?
Chris.
Carissa.
Carissa, both drove a township truck, which was great. And they went around picking up probably more than usual this year. We also had participation from our front office with Michelle Kasser printing up our flyers again. And again, I'd like to extend the thanks to everyone around this table as well. You know, Councillor Roth for his continued support of enabling township trucks to participate in this, and the staff to produce the flyers. It makes a big difference to the community. Councillor Sepoulis, who of course delivered the flyers, certainly appreciate that. And I have an apology that I promised to give Councillor Goyda, because I managed to engage Councillor Goyda to ride along on one of the trucks on the promise that the trucks would be finished. If she showed up at 9:30, no problem, they'd be back and done by noon. But as I understand it, the trucks weren't off the road till 3 o'clock. So it was a lot more than usual, and that's a good sign, I guess, that people are picking it up. But all around, it was an all-hands-on-deck event, and it was great to see every department participate. So thank you very much for that. I guess that's, from that, then we're going to move into closed session. Okay, I'll put that in there. Okay. Oh, here we go. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Roth and seconded by Councillor Sepoulis that we move into closed section. I'm going to have you read this one, because
Okay.
this is pretty legally, this is probably pretty specific, so.
Okay. That council shall go into closed session under Section 239 of the Municipal Act for the purpose of confidential verbal report from Peter Pickfield, Garrett Pickfield LLP regarding litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, and personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, with respect to 4002 Highway 6.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we will be going into closed session now. We will rise and report from closed session afterwards if any of the members of the public wish to return afterwards. So, anyhow, we have a motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Thank you for the reminder.
Bye.
Hi, Mary. Thank you. I'll